Okay, Rabbi Say, let's find out if the milk that we drink is kosher. Sounds intriguing. This is a shiur that I gave on Shavuos night, so I'm just recording it now for my online listeners. Okay, here we go. So we have a Gemara in Bechoros that says, Kol yoytza min tameahu. Anything that comes from something tameh is tameh. So let's say, like we discussed last week, if you have milk that comes from a camel is a tameh animal. So the milk that comes from the tameh animal, it itself is tameh. Now Rabbi said that's not only true by a camel, by a behemoth tameah, but even an animal that its species is kosher, but it itself is not kosher. For example, a treifos. So if you have a cow, which is a treifos, then any milk that comes from that treifos, that milk will not be kosher. Let's give a basic example. So let's say the cow in the backyard got its leg chopped off above the knee, which would make it a treifos. And then I go and milk that cow missing the leg, which is a treifos. That milk is 100% not kosher mid'oraisa. This point is undebatable. Every posek that ever lived and every posek that ever will live said that the milk that came out of that cow is treif, not kosher. Okay? That is fair enough. Now, so seemingly I go to the cow in the backyard and I milk it. You know, it has all its legs. It looks okay. We should be okay and we should be fine to milk that cow. But wait a second. Maybe that cow in the backyard, maybe it's a treifos. Maybe it has some problem on its lungs that makes it into a treifos, some adhesion to its lungs that makes it into a treifos. I don't know. I can't see through it to see its lungs. I have no idea that it's not a treifos. How could I drink milk from that cow? Surely, suffik d'oraisa l'chumra. How could I play games with a d'oraisa and drink that milk? Well, I think most of us or all of us are familiar with the klal. As the Torah says, Achi Rabban Lahatis, called the parish miru b'parish. We're allowed to rely on Raiv and assume that this milk which is leaving that animal, that we're going to assume that it's leaving the Raiv. We're assuming we're going to treat this animal, this cow, like Raiv cows. And since Raiv cows are not treifos, Mimela, the milk coming from Betsy in the backyard is kosher, even though I cannot verify that, there's no adhesions to its lungs or any other internal organs. Okay, fine, that works. Wait a second, maybe this isn't so simple. From what I've read, apparently, in the United States, around 2/3 of the cows are discounted as not being glatt kosher. They are not accepted as being glatt kosher. That's 2/3. Now, for those that aren't so good at math, 2/3, 66.6 recurring, is more than 50%. So this kind of creates a little bit of a problem. How am I going to claim that our milk is kosher because we're going to follow the Raiv? If Raiv behemoths are treifos, there's no Raiv to follow. So how is this going to work? Well, not so bad. And just another statistical point to throw out there from what I read, because I just found it interesting. Apparently in South America, Raiv of the cows are not treifos, and Raiv of the cows are accepted. Apparently it has a difference to do with whether cows are grain-fed or whether they're able to graze more. If they're able to graze more, they have less issues, like in South America. But we're in America, where it's financially it makes sense to make them grain-fed, and by the way, in Eretz Yisrael, they're also grain-fed primarily. Then you have much more issues with treifos, apparently. I'm not a veterinarian who could draw the dots from why eating grain as opposed to grass might cause treifos, but I guess there is a connection. Therefore, in South America, it's not a roiv, but in America, roiv of the cows are treifos. Now, that doesn't sound so good. And by the way, the milk, we're not importing milk from South America to America. We're getting the milk from American cows. And in Eretz Yisrael, they're getting milk from Israeli cows. I didn't find the statistics on Israeli cows, but that's what I found in American cows. Fine. I would imagine Israel shouldn't be any better than America in that respect, but who knows? Okay, so if roiv are treifos, we're in problems. Well, it's not such a problem. Why not? So there's going to be a Metzias point and a Svara point. The Metzias point is that a lot of those cows that are being considered discarded, I should say, aren't pure treifos. A lot of them are suffix treifos. A lot of them are chumros, and we know that they're chumros, but they're not pure treifos. Therefore, not the full range is going to be considered treifos. Furthermore, which cows get shechted? So usually there's two types of cows that get shechted. Either the cows which were breeded to be shechted, okay, fine. But there's also a whole other bunch of the cows that originally were dairy cows. They were milk for milk purposes. They stopped producing. They're getting older. They're not in such good shape. So we shecht them. It may be that the cows that are in their prime milking age, a smaller percentage of them are treifos. And it's these older or worn out cows that have such a high percentage of treifos. So therefore, it's likely that the percentage that are treifos are definitely less than 50%. You know, your estimate's as good as mine. I don't know, probably somewhere between 10 and 30% are real treifos, but it probably is not roiv that are real treifos. Okay, great. So now, most of our cows are not treifos. Great. Achiram lahata. It's just like the olden days. Everything's great. Are we done this year? Not so fast. Why not so fast? Because let's take a second to think about this. Nowadays, the way that milk is produced isn't like it was once upon a time. We don't go to the backyard and milk Betsy. Rather, there are farms that have hundreds or thousands of cows. The cows are milked, and they're stored in some storage something in the farm. Then they get all the milk is mixed together, and then it gets trucked to a dairy processing plant, a milk processing plant, where they do all sorts of things. They mix it all up, they take the fat out, put it back in, they use some for cheese, they use some for cottage cheese, whatever it is that they're doing. But all this milk is getting all mixed together, not only from this one farm, but from many farms. So we're taking milk of thousands of cows, and we're mixing it all together. Now, let's take a second and think about it. So in this huge vat, we have milk of thousands of cows, and that all gets mixed together. So in my cup of milk, or really my cup of coffee right here, the milk that's inside that coffee is really milk from hundreds or thousands of cows mixed together. Okay, what's the issue? Well, wait a second. There is multiple types of roiv. There are three basic types of roiv. One type of roiv is what we call bittul b'roiv. That would be, for example, when a little milk spills into your big chont. So we're able to say it gets absorbed into the chont. We're able to say every ounce of that chont is kosher. Oh, what do you mean? There's a little milk that fell in. That milk, since it was less than a 60th of the size of the chont, and it got absorbed in, is batul into the chont. And it's batul mevatul, it doesn't exist anymore, and this chont is 100% pure kosher. We have another type of roiv called a ruba delesa kaman, where the roiv is not in front of us. What does that mean? That is it. The example is there are 10 stores in town, and 9 are kosher, 1 is treif. I have one piece in front of me, and I am allowed to assume that this one piece came from a kosher store. That is a ruba delesa kaman. And then the third type of roiv that we have is a ruba de'isa kaman. A ruba de'isa kaman is when I have 10 pieces of meat in front of me. I know that of these 10 pieces of meat in front of me, there is 9 that are kosher, and I know that there is one treif. It's a ruba de'isa kaman. Everything's in front of me. And I am allowed to pick up that one piece and eat it. Now let's think for a minute about what are the halakhical differences between these three types of roiv. So when it comes to bittul b'roiv, the first example, it only applies when I have 60 times the isser sometimes. We'll see if that's always true. It may not be always true. I really jumped the gun on that. Sometimes we'll see we need 60, sometimes we need a basic roiv. And once we're done with it, it all is considered to be kosher, the entire batch. Then we have a ruba d'leisa kaman. A ruba d'leisa kaman is when I take this one piece, and as we said, I can take this one piece and decide and assume that this one piece is kosher. Then there's ruba de'isa kaman, where I have 10 pieces in front of me. I can take any one piece, and I can assume that one piece is kosher. I cannot take all 10 pieces and eat it b'bas achas at the same time, because one of them for sure is not kosher. I could take 9 and eat them, and therefore if it's not, and each one of those 9 say, this is for sure good, this one's for sure good, this one's for sure good. In fact, I could eat 5 and you could eat 5. And we could each, we're fine, I didn't eat them all. Whether I could eat half today, half tomorrow, that's a different discussion, not for now. But I definitely can't eat 10 of them at the same time. Okay. Before when I was discussing taking milk from the backyard, I was referring to a ruba d'leisa kaman. And I was allowed to assume that the milk that I was taking was of the kosher format. But over here, if I have a mix between kosher milk and not kosher milk, that's more like the cholent case, where the general principle is you need 60 to be mevatel the miyat. This is min b'minoi. So it's the milk of the kosher milk and the non-kosher milk taste the same. So over here, the requirement to have 60 to be mevatel, to nullify the non-kosher milk, is presumably derabanan. But still, even if it's only derabanan, it's still a derabanan chiyuv of requiring shishim. And over here, I don't have shishim, because anything above 1.7%, you don't have shishim. Over here, what do I have? I have 10, 20, 30% of non-kosher milk. So since I do not have shishim, this milk should be not kosher. Midrabanan, at least, it should not be kosher. How are we going to do this? Seems like a knockout punch. It's a statistical fact. When you mix thousands of cows together, and the statistics are 10 to 30% treifa, there's going to be treifa milk here, and it's not going to be batal b'shishim. There's kamat nothing to discuss from a statistical standpoint. And to just be clear, we can't use the kol deparish seemingly, because over here what our suffix is dealing with is a big mixture. If I would just go to one cow in the backyard, I'm fine with that. I could use kol deparish where I don't need 60. There I need a basic roiv, a basic majority, 51%. But over here where I'm mixing things together, for that roiv to be effective, certainly on the rabbanon level, I would need the heter, the kosher milk, to be 60 times as much as the non-kosher milk. And we know as a statistical fact that we do not have that. So, seems like our milk is not kosher. How could we possibly kosher our milk? What could we possibly do to argue and claim that our milk is kosher? So there's an argument and an explanation that I saw from Rav Asher Weiss. Really, I'm going to call this pshat Rav Asher Weiss, but I'm pretty sure this is not really just Rav Asher Weiss's pshat. I think there's multiple people that hold this pshat. I happen to, my eyes first came across it in Rav Asher Weiss, so I'm going to call it the Rav Asher Weiss pshat, but I think there are others that hold it as well. And it goes like this. From that cow, what did I milk? Well, I milked kol deparish meruba parish. I milked kosher milk. I want to give you a mathematical equation. Kosher milk plus kosher milk plus kosher milk plus kosher milk plus kosher milk equals, you guessed it, kosher milk. Zot Rav Asher Weiss, if every milk that I milk from the animal is kosher, so if I mix together tons of kosher milk, obviously all that I'm going to get is kosher milk. It's not an issue. Kosher milk plus kosher milk equals kosher milk. And in Mela, we don't have a problem. You don't even need to be mevatel the Isser, because you have parish called the parish meruba parish, and azlina basa roiv. We're following the roiv by each squirt of that udder, and assuming that it's kosher. Memela, now no bittul is even required because I just have pure kosher milk. Now this pshat of Rav Asher Weiss is mechudesh on two fronts. One front as to why it's mechudesh is that we're using roiv to go against the statistics. What do I mean? Usually we would assume that roiv is what we call a klali hasafik. It's something, when in doubt, then we use a roiv to inform us about what the halacha is, because we're in doubt about the metzias. So the roiv would be the klali hasafik. It would tell us what halacha wants us to do when in doubt. However, over here, we're not in doubt. We know for sure, it's a statistical fact that there is treif milk in here. There's nothing to talk about. He asked the statistician, it's going to be like there's a 99.9999% chance that there is that there is treif milk in here. And in halacha, that's a fact. So if I don't have a suffix, where does roiv even come in to start the discussion? I don't need roiv. I know it's treif. The fact that we're going to use roiv to go blatantly against the metzias, against the statistical fact, that is a chiddush. That's chiddush number one. Chiddush number two is, when are we donning the suffix? When are we applying the roiv? Certainly by a non-Chalav Yisrael farm. I'll get to Chalav Yisrael in a second. There might be more to debate. But in a non-Chalav Yisrael farm, assuming that we're relying on the Heter Moshe for all the Chalav Yisrael issues, this cow is milked by a guy in Oklahoma. When is the shayla starting? When I go to that rest stop and I want to pour that milk into my coffee, the shayla is now, what is this milk? Do I have a roiv now? No, I don't have a roiv. It's a big mix-up. To say the pshat of Rav Asher Weiss, you have to say that we're going to apply the roiv at the farm in Oklahoma. When the guy is milking the cow in Oklahoma, at that point, we're going to apply the roiv. Which is a chiddush, because in the words of the Lamdish words, the suffix wasn't noiled yet. In practical terms, we aren't at a point of judging that suffix to apply any halakhic principles, because it hasn't affected any Jew as of yet. But Rav Asher Weiss is learning the roiv as a metzias. And it's a metzias. We don't need to don the suffix. At each time, even if there's no Jew involved, we're allowed to, at that time, say there was a roiv, apply the roiv to the milk, and memela it's all kosher. So that is a chiddush to apply that roiv at the time of milking. By a Chalav Yisrael farm, where there are Jews involved in the process, it still is a chiddush, but it's not as big of a chiddush. Because, since there's Jews involved, you could say that even though we're not eating it now, but the Jew who's involved in the process wants to know if it's kosher. Maybe. That is reasonable. But it is not clear. Because one could argue, until I'm at the time of actually drinking or eating the milk, the suffix hasn't really been noiled as of yet. Okay, so those are the two chidushim that are involved in Rav Asher Weiss's pshat. There is another pshat, and this pshat is based on the Or Sameach. The Or Sameach does not actually weigh into our sugya. However, this is the lumdus of the Or Sameach, which many apply to matter the milk in our case. And we'll call it the Or Sameach pshat, but I think most of the poskim are working with this Or Sameach. And it goes like this. Based on what I've said so far, I explained that Bittul B'Roiv was a mitzias. The minority is swallowed up by the majority, and the minority ceases to exist. That little milk that falls into the cholent, it's all pure cholent now. That milk has lost its identity. However, when it was a case of Ruba Delesa Kaman, for example, we assumed that this piece of meat in front of me was from the majority. The Torah gave us the right to assume. And if that was the case, as mentioned earlier, we run into problems. Yes, I can make the assumption about one case, but it's very difficult to make the assumption when it's going straight in the face of statistical fact. How could you assume something which you know is wrong? However, Zak the Or Sameach, that's not how Roiv works. Even Ruba Delesa Kaman, the way that it works is the kosher cows of the world are mevatel, the treif cows of the world. And memela, we view it as if all the cows of the world are kosher. One more time. Not that we're going to assume the cow that we're discussing is kosher. Rather, we know the statistics. 70 are kosher, 30 are not kosher. That's the statistics. However, what we're going to do is, from a halachic perspective, we're going to treat the cows as if 100% of those cows are kosher, except the ones that are known to be treifos. We're going to treat 100% of those cows to be kosher. Once we treat 100% of those cows to be kosher, mimela, we have no problem. All the milk came from the kosher cows. Because halacha says the whole concept of Roiv, the whole gezeres HaKasav, the whole direction of the Torah is treat them all like they're members of the Roiv. So I'll tell you, Mitzias, it came from, I'm not making assumptions. In Mitzias, it came from non-kosher cows, 30%. But the Torah said the halacha is the milk that comes from any of these cows has a din kosher. Because the Torah said we treat all 100% of the cows as kosher, even though in Mitzias it's not true. The Torah has a right to say such a chiddush. Is it a big chiddush? Yeah. But if that's what the Torah says, that's what the Torah says. And memela, once all the cows are kosher, all the milk's just fine. And the Or Sameach bases on the fact that we only have one pasuk in the Torah teaching us bittul, achar Rab Lahatis. If they worked with such far-ranging different lumduses, you would require two separate pasukim. So from the fact that you have one pasuk, it must be that all the Roiv works with bittul and nothing has anything to do with assumptions. Okay, so this is obviously a mechudesh way of learning, understanding Roiv. But once you understand Roiv, now we can understand how our milk will be kosher. There is one additional point which isn't so pashut, which is that we're applying this Roiv in Oklahoma, as I said in my example, and we're not applying it on the milk, which we're going to say Roiv of the animals are kosher. But okay, we could handle that chiddush. But it's not so pashut. Okay, that is the pshat of the Or Sameach, and memela, our milk is kosher. But you understand there are some people, a couple people out there that don't drink milk, and you can understand where they're coming from. But we either have Rav Asher Weiss to say that each milk we're allowed to assume is kosher, and we're allowed to make these assumptions in the face of statistics, Whereas the Or Sameach's pshat is, we're full aware of the statistics, just the Gezeirus Sukasov of the Torah is, even though statistically some of this is not kosher, the Torah says we should treat all the cows as kosher. And it's not an assumption. We know the Metzias. But Ein Chinami, even against the Metzias, we treat all that milk as kosher. Okay. All's nice, all's fine. In the last 25 years, there is another issue that surfaced. The cows who have displaced ammonia or something or another, we'll call it DA. These cows, this started becoming a phenomenon when they started grain feeding cows as opposed to grass feeding them. They started getting bloated. And when these cows get bloated, they get stuff in their stomach gets displaced, and if you don't treat it, they'll die. So the veterinarians primarily treat this with a surgery, and they make a hole in the stomach, which somehow releases the gas. Now, eventually, that hole, there's tissue that ends up growing over that hole. It ends up getting healed, and these cows live for more than 12 months. It's true. And everybody lives happily ever after. Now, like 25 years ago or so, somebody noticed, hey, wait a second, isn't that hole in the stomach a problem? Doesn't it make it a treifa? Because on the list of treifos, we know a hole in the stomach or in that part of the stomach, that makes an animal into a treifa. So if that makes an animal a treifa, these animals are considered to be treifos. Okay, fine. So what does that, we knew we had treifos already. Does that change anything? So just one more thing to point out. There was this type of procedure, whether it has a din treifa, when the tissue is going to end up growing over the hole in the stomach. So there was, in one of the great debates between the Rashba and the Riva, I think it was, the Rashba wrote his Sefer Teres Abayis, and the Riva wrote his Sefer arguing on lots of things in the Teres Abayis called Bedek Abayis. And then the Rashba wrote his defense against the Bedek Abayis, defending his Teres Abayis called Mishmeres Abayis. So there was a big fight in the Rishonim, very geschmack. So the Rashba writes, the Teres Abayis writes, this type of thing is still considered a treifa, even if the tissue regrows over the hole. Whereas the Bedek Abayis says it's not a treifa. And in the Mishmeres Abayis, the Rashba defends himself and says, yes, it is a treifa, without getting into heavy detail as to why it should or shouldn't be a treifa. L'maisa, apparently throughout the Deiros, we always went with the Rashba and treated this as a treifa. So therefore, based on our Messiah, based on the Rashba, this is a treifa. Okay, is this a common thing? How often does it happen? So apparently it depends on region and conditions and etc. But generally, apparently it ranges between 5 and 15% of the cows get this DA procedure. Okay, fine. Who cares? It's still a minority. And if it's still a minority, our milk should be okay. Wait a second, not so fast. Let's think about this. Remember we said in the beginning that if I go to Betsy in the backyard and the Betsy got her leg cut off above the knee, the milk is treif. I can't say, oh, right, behemoths are kosher. No. If you're a treifa and it is nicker, then you're a treifa. Roiv won't help to be mevatel a treifa that's nicker. Right? Simple, I didn't enroive. I can't take, 9 kosher burgers, and then I take one McDonald's burger that looks totally different, put them all on the table, and eat all 10. Because as nicker, you see what's treif. Now, these DA cows, they keep a scar for, a year or whatever, and eventually the scar gets healed. But cows got much more technologically advanced than they once were. Each cow is scannable. You could scan their ear, and you could pull up their medical records, and it will say right on the medical records, this cow had a DA procedure. And therefore, if the DA cows are recognizable, is it simple to say that they are batal and the milk is okay? So, before we try to find the heterim, let's speak out that all the Chalav Yisrael milking places are makbid on this. So, if it's one of those farms, like Pride of the Farm, which is a solely Chalav Yisrael milking farm, so the way that it works is, if they get any DA cows, they just sell it off to another farm, and they're not even devalued. It's considered a fully healthy cow. So, and then another farm takes them, they don't deal with them. There's another type of farm, which is a contracted farm, where Chalav Yisrael does a run, I don't know, once or twice a week. The Chalav Yisrael mashkichim come in and do a run. In those farms, when the veterinarians, whoever it is, does the procedures on those cows, they put a ribbon or a rubber band or a batch, or they make it scannable, that those are DA cows. And it's the job of the mashkichim to make certain that none of the DA cows come into the Chalav Yisrael milking run. And the Mela, the Chalav Yisrael milking run is free of these DA cows. So this is for sure going to be a huge advantage of Chalav Yisrael, and this has nothing to do with the sugya of Chalav Yisrael. So it's kind of ironic. This point has zero to do with the sugya of Chalav Yisrael, nothing about it. But there's a strong advantage if you drink Chalav Yisrael, because they get around this DA, they deal with this DA cow issue. Now, what about the cows in Oklahoma? There's nothing that we could do to make every farmer in Oklahoma start, not using these DA cows. So, what are we going to do? Is it a treifa? So let's think back to Rav Asher Weiss's svara and see if it's easy to apply. So we're going to have to say that at the time of milking each cow, we're going to assume that milk is coming from the roiv and called the parish meruva parish. Now, if it's nicker that this cow is a DA cow, how in the world do you say called the parish meruva parish? You can't. It's nicker. You just scan the ear and you'll know that it's a treifa cow. And it might even have a scar on the side, which makes it obvious that it's a treifa cow. And if that's the case, how could you milk that cow and say, oh, this is called a parish meruba parish? Very difficult. And don't tell me that, well, the shayla is only coming up now that I have the cup in front of me. Because you're digging a hole, if the shayla is only happening now when you have the cup of milk in front of you, so now it's a taruvus of kosher milk and not kosher milk. We need to daven the shayla at the time of milking. We can't daven the shayla. If we daven the shayla when the cup of milk's in front of me, it's too late. It's for sure going to be treif. So you have to make our assumptions at the time that the animal's being milked. That's when you have to judge the shayla. So if we're judging the shayla when the animal's being milked, wait a second, this cow in front of you is a DA cow. How's this going to work? The only way it's going to work is by saying that we don't have access to that information. And since we don't have access to that information, because, we can't scan it, if I call up that farmer in Oklahoma, he's not going to let me scan his cows. So since we don't have access to that information, mimela, it's like something that it's something that we just don't know about, and it's not nicker, and mimela it's batal. Not pashut, not pashut at all, but possible, but not pashut. What about if you work with the Or Samech? That the Or Samech says, let's remind ourselves, the Or Samech says that the vart is, it's all batal. Right? The kosher cows are batal, the not kosher cows throughout the world, and all the milk's kosher. Well, we said it's not going to be mevatel the cow that has its light cut off, where it's absolutely nicker that it's a treifa. So over here, how is it going to be mevatel this cow? It's a treifa. It's pretty nicker. So you're going to have to come onto the same idea. It's not nicker to us. We don't have access to the information of it being a treifa. And Memela, since we don't have access to the information of it being a treifa, it ain't a nicker, and Memela, it's batal. Not pashut. Not pashut at all. It's a little easier in the Or Samech than Rav Asher Weiss, but it's really not pashut. Because this is something that's nicker. It just takes one